A very good morning to one and all present here today, respected dignitaries, delegates, faculty, and students. Today we are on day 3 of this highly knowledge disseminating conference that has provided us with valuable insights across multiple facets of employment over the last 2 days. We have 2 tracks today. The first focusing on education, skill development and employment, and the second on entrepreneurship and employment. We would like to begin with the first track of the day, that is education, skill development and employment. The knowledge partner for this track is Symbiosis International University and Asia Europe Foundation. I would like to thank SIU and Mr. Guntars from ASEF for being our knowledge partner. I welcome the chair for the track, Dr. Vidya Ma'am, eminent speakers, Dr. Vinny Jauhari, Mr. Guntar Skatlax, Mr. Clemo Showe, and Dr. Santosh Kumar Mehrotra, who is on Skype with us. Dr. Vidya Yerwadekar is the Pro-Chancellor of Symbiosis International University and the Principal Director of Symbiosis Society. She holds a postgraduate degree in medicine, a degree in law, and a PhD in internationalization of higher education in India. To promote international understanding through quality education, she has brought in innovative approaches at SIU through international collaborations with top universities in the world. May I now request our Pro-Chancellor, Dr. Vidya Yerwadekar Ma'am, to please come and open the proceedings of the track.
A very good morning to all the delegates, speakers, our Vice Chancellor Dr. Gupte, Dr. Jyoti Chandiramani, the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, my colleagues on stage, and of course my young and bright students. This is a very important topic that we are going to discuss this morning, skill development, education and employment. But let me first begin by apologizing for not being present for the 2 days prior to this, specifically the day when you had this curtain raiser event and yesterday's inaugural function because of some other commitments that I had. But as I told Jyoti that I think for me, and I'll speak on behalf of the Vice Chancellor also, we enjoy actually either speaking at sessions and not really sitting there, addressing you all through a welcome address. So because it really helps us to even prepare for speeches and study the subject a little more than what we know. Jyoti actually requested me to speak about universities of the future and then open this topic of skill development, education and employment. And I think we as academicians and of course universities all across India and across the world, each and every person working in a university has been thinking of this. What kind of education should be imparted to our students? What kind of employment potential will the students have, and what kind of jobs would the industry generate so that we prepare our students for these jobs. And when we think about what kind of jobs would the industry be offering to our students, I'm sure as academicians we also don't know. We're preparing our students for today, for tomorrow, but not really for maybe 2 years down the line or 5 years down the line, because when you join certain jobs, you are going to be changing your profiles. And of course, with so much of interference, I would say, of technology or assistance of technology, those jobs wouldn't remain as they were when you joined them. If you talk about India as a country, we all know that by 2020, we will be a home to almost 1.35 billion people, of whom 906 million will be of the working age. And therefore, there is a great challenge with a billion plus population that also lives distinctly in different segments of India, the developed, the emerging and the underserved. Preparing the workforce for this new order society requires rethinking of the traditional education model. And presently India's challenges are immense, with its 672 million young population, with 50% of them in the working age group. Jobs will have to be created to gainfully employ 100 million youth who will enter the job market. It's not just about creating jobs within India, but projections also indicate that the aging developed world would also require almost 56 million workforce by 2030. And as per the FECO ENY analysis, by 2030, 1 out of 4 graduates would be educated in India and be a part of the global workforce. And therefore, India has this potential to leverage this opportunity so that we educate and skill our youth to be globally competitive. In this era of Industry 4.0, university degrees have reduced its relevance owing to the rapid transformational change due to the exponential technological disruption. And we have with us my colleague who also sits as a member on the FECO Higher Education Committee, Vinny, who will cover this. And therefore, we need to consider a new approach which could play a significant role in the transformation of our higher education. Universities of the future must be prepared for both unprecedented challenges as well as unparalleled opportunities for innovation. Knowledge is poised to gain prominence as more and more countries we know are moving towards knowledge economy model of development. And in the years to come, universities will have to outgrow their traditional status of standalone academic institutions as higher education becomes ever more integrated into the economy and the larger community. And as globalization and technological advances gather momentum, education policy must encourage universities to assume an active leadership. Studies on future projections for higher education also suggest that technological advances are considered to be amongst the top influential factors. Technology will continue to shape and reshape the learning process, and therefore universities must be prepared for a technology-enabled future. And therefore, even we at Symbiosis are looking at various ways how we can integrate technology in our academic delivery. And therefore, whether it is MOOCs or a combination of digital training and traditional classroom teaching is what we as academicians keep contemplating. As I said, Education 4.0 is a response to Industry 4.0 and places the student at the center of the higher education system. The 21st century intelligent technologies are disrupting the process of learning, and this is going to accelerate with time. So preparing the workforce for this 21st century society will require for us as academicians rethinking of our education model and adopt cutting-edge teaching practices to prepare our young to live in a complex, multidimensional and global society. And I think Mr. Gunter is going to speak about the flexibility in the Latvian education system. And I'm sure he'll bring forth a lot of, his views that probably some of us as academicians can integrate in our systems. I think we can all agree on the pivotal role of higher education and the need for robust universities to support the knowledge economy as well as to provide the knowledge necessary for the social mobility and economic progress essential to societies across the globe. The contribution of universities to collective welfare will only strengthen in the future as universities assume leadership roles in guiding national and world leaders on the path of peace, cooperation and prosperity. I think the session is going to be extremely important in the light of the sessions that have taken place over the last 2 days. And I just heard from Dr. Jyoti that I think in every session, the importance of education, the importance of skill development came in. So when we spoke about whether it was economic reforms or any other sessions regarding challenges in employment, statistics, and the other sessions that have taken place, I think every speaker must have spoken about the need to offer education which will generate employment. We have a very august gathering of speakers, someone who's going to cover skill development and who spearheads the mission of skill development in India. We also, as I said, have Vinny, who handles the technological intervention in education, and of course we have someone, an eminent speaker from Latvia, who will speak about the flexibility of the education system in his country. I think we've really brought in different dimensions of how education and skill development will help in employment, and I will of course not like to introduce the speakers because you have technology supporting the introduction of speakers, so I wouldn't spend time on that. But I would request Mr. Gunter to begin with the session, with his views, and then after all the three speakers are over, we can break open for question and answers. Thank you.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for this introduction and having me here at Symbiosis University. I'm very honored and pleased to be speaking today about reforms which we are undertaking in my own country, but I would like to begin with a small comparison. I'm coming from Latvia, which I don't know how many of you know where it is and what does that country look like, but it is a small northern Eastern European country. We are 2 million people, and probably it would be very difficult to find bigger disparity or two more different countries than India and Latvia. India is a huge, hot country rich in human and natural resources. We are very small, cold. We have winter right now. I came with my big coat and I have to carry it with me right now traveling in India. But there is something very, very deeply familiar and common between these two countries. And that is the fact that future of our countries will not fall upon us somewhere from outside. It will be created by those people who are currently in our education, in primary, secondary schools, at universities. These will be the people who will be making economy, politics, and society of years to come, and not only of a few next years, but in the middle of this century, 21st century. And that is the common challenge, and that is where I think we can find many, many similarities how we see the role of education in bringing our societies forward. I will speak today about education for the 21st century in my own country, but I think that perspective will be quite similar, and certainly what we are doing, we find many commonalities across OECD countries and European Union countries and elsewhere. We undertake at the moment, I would say, 360 degrees reforms of our education system. And that covers general education, vocational education and training, higher education, and adult education. I will be making my point, in fact, that if we think about education in terms of contemporary and the future needs, we should not to look at different levels of education as something separate and different. In fact, we are talking about lifelong learning. And there is a reason for that. Why the reforms are necessary now? And there are several points which I would like to say. The first of all, economic, social, political situation has radically changed. Education must change as well in order to meet requirements of the 21st century. We are not anymore in a situation where we were in most of the 20th century when, in fact, much of what we did, how we learned and how we studied and how we worked afterwards was predetermined by existing situations which would last for very long times. Now the change is rapid, and I'm not talking only about technological change. Whitney will be speaking about that much more later on, but about change, what is happening in societies. And the one reason to say is that according to OECD data, 65% of the young people like you today, who will start their education today, will work in professions that don't exist yet. We don't know what these professions will be. We don't know what exactly you will be doing in your lives. That doesn't mean that we cannot plan. Of course we can plan. We just need to change our mindset, how we plan about those skills and those attitudes that people will have in the future. And not just in a narrow sense of professional skills in a certain given context, but about competencies of people which they will have to show in whatever they will do in the future. All our reforms in education, from the higher education down to the preschool education, are guided with one idea: expected result or outcome, student competence. And by competence we mean, as it comes also from OECD data and research, three sets which come together. One is knowledge, and knowledge remains very important, even in technological age, when we can find all information in instantly whatever topic we are looking to. But we have to admit that the knowledge becomes even more important as information expands. And I would say that would be not only procedural knowledge, not only knowledge about various facts, but also epistemic knowledge, because the matter is that we shall be able to distinguish what kind of facts are real facts, what are grounded in reality, and what are just opinions which are very often given as a fact. Skills are paramount important, and these are transversal skills which would be needed in any kind of job which we will be doing in the future, and certainly in learning lifelong. But it's also attitudes and values. And it might sound strange that we are giving so much role to attitudes and values nowadays, but we know that nothing can be more dangerous than very well skilled and knowledgeable person who has very bad intentions. I will not go in details about that, but we understand that in current political and social situations elsewhere in Europe and in India, this is becoming very, very important. So we want to have people of the future who will be both knowledgeable, skillful, but also will have a right set of attitudes and values, so they would like to work and devote their all energy towards making a society and country and the planet a better place to live for all of us. Very important thing here on this slide is, which I would like to emphasize, that it's very, very difficult at the time of education, at any given stage, would it be preschool, would it be primary school or secondary school, to see how these competencies are developing. In fact, we can see them only in action. It is very hard to measure. With all our examination systems and everything we have, it is very hard to measure how a person will behave in real life. And of course, school is not itself a real life. We design curriculums to reflect real life situations, but we cannot really make it real. But guiding idea from a pedagogy point of view is to make education as close possible to reality as possible. So students will be learning from very young age to demonstrate and to act and to behave in environments and ways and fashions as we want them to behave in the future. So, with all that in mind, coming back to Latvian case, we are pioneers in reforming education across OECD countries. As you see shown on this map, which is OECD data, currently our country, which is that top red bar on the right-hand side, is numbering the sheer size of reforms in education what we are doing at the moment. So maybe that is one reason why I'm also invited here, because speaking in various conferences and contexts, people are wondering how that is possible. Knowing that education policy making is very complicated and difficult and problematic thing, I can draw on my experience working 10 years in Brussels, Belgium at Education International as a policy analyst across the OECD regions, and the last 4 years in my own country being responsible for implementing reforms, not all of them, but those which cover general education, vocational education and training. I can say that you need to have, first of all, very strong political commitment, and then of course you have to have very diplomatic skills in bringing together various interest groups and attitudes and convincing people that by doing this we will all be better off. It is not an easy thing to do. And I understand that one thing is to speak about Latvian context, which is a small country, relatively small, and the very different thing is to speak about Indian context, which is much more different. But in general, these are 5 large reform sets. And the first one is a competence-based curriculum in general education, which I briefly illustrated about this previous slide. It's about strengthening STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics at all education levels, including curriculum, extracurricular activities, infrastructure. Very big emphasis we are placing on vocational education and training, which used to be considered as a second-rank alternative for those who would not be successful in general education. Also bringing in adult education in this expanding work-based learning, which is our major reform direction. Labor market relevant adult education and closer cooperation between stakeholders. As I said, we are putting a huge emphasis in order to bring together entrepreneurs, business sector, different stakeholders which are interested in expected learning outcomes. This is just a brief illustration of our main projects which we are doing right now with the use also of EU structural funds. School 2030 is a general education curriculum reform. We're also mapping educational infrastructure interactively to see how it corresponds to our needs and doing many other things. Speaking very briefly about the main directions and tracks of these reforms. In organization of general education curriculum, we're coming from very strong and deep-rooted academic tradition. In Latvia, general education, compulsory education has been granted constitutional rights for now more than 100 years. It's free of charge. Everyone is entitled to a full basic and secondary education. The question is about its quality. We don't have problems of access. We are a very small country. There is altogether 200,000 students in compulsory and higher education in total in country, so we can get access almost to everyone. The question is what we will do with this access and what these people will get out of it. The basic education, which is 1st to 9th grade, first of all, we integrated subject areas into 7 fields of learning. So to make a connection to a real life. In real life we don't have mathematics, we don't have physics, we have real life situations. And if you are serious about getting students to problem-solving skills and critical thinking and making connection with theoretical knowledge to practical needs and the problems of every day, we have to get out of this gridlock or very strict measurement of the subjects which they do about. It is modular approach in course design. That means that students can work on bigger modules for a longer time period, not following very strictly prescribed syllabuses, more time for deeper learning. And in this information age, as I said previously, nobody anymore can afford a universal knowledge about everything. It's extremely important at this time and even everywhere else that we learn less about something and more deeper about something. That we devote time in order to dig in very deeply into some problem solving, and we find these transversal skills in this, how we can do it in other fields of learning later. Greater school autonomy in implementing the program. We are abolishing very strict lesson plans which would demand that every student every day does 1 hour on mathematics, 1 hour on music or something else. We are opening up curriculum so schools can organize their time flexibly and students can devote time for a deeper learning in some area. And emphasis on evaluation of the transversal skills, which means that we are also changing our exam systems. We don't see big use of standardized testing when we just pick right boxes in answers, yes or no, right or correct. We have to test what we value and measure what we value, not that what is easily measurable. In secondary education, we are also changing curriculum. We are going to more integral ways that the first year will be compulsory subjects in all fields, and then students will specialize in a smaller number of subject areas in order to study them deeper and prepare for future career or education. Few words about vocational education and training. As I said, it used to be considered as a second rank education process where those who cannot get into general education, into academic education, that they will have to acquire some skills. We are doing everything possible to make vocational education and training as prestigious or even more prestigious than general education. And that covers all 5 aspects here of reform directions what we have. One is a reduced school network. Again, having many small technical vocational schools of the past does not fit the needs of the 21st century. We are making vocational education training schools more similar to universities. So less in number, but much better equipped and with a greater student numbers. Curricular reform. I will not speak much about details, it's quite complicated. It's creating a national qualifications framework, it's creating modular programs, which means basically in short that the students in vocational education training, whatever age, can have a full curriculum, full program which would lead to a certain qualification, but also a person would acquire some specific modules in this qualification framework, which would give a particular skill set which would allow to do some work without having a full qualification in this. We can think about the car mechanics, for example, and somebody can specialize in a modular program and being fully skilled and qualified to do tire repairs, for example, not being a fully qualified car mechanic. And that would allow also many adult populations and people from outside to go inside, not having to spend 3 years in a full VET program, but having acquired a shorter 1 semester or 2 semesters course in order to get this qualification. The work-based learning is a key paramount aspect of this vocational education reform. That means that a part of curriculum, either in full qualification or in modular course, should be linked to real work situations. So we are putting great resources in order to work together with employers, with the bigger or smaller companies, and there are challenges in this. But so they should have these students in their workplace. They will not have to pay a full salary. These students will not be employed persons during this learning. They will be still students. They will receive some stipends from the government, and they can receive some benefits also from an employer, but they will be doing a job on the place, and the learning in the same time. So work-based learning is now becoming a new curriculum reform requirement in all vocational education training programs. And of course, on the other side, we need to motivate and involve employers so they would be interested in offering these study places. And of course, governance and cooperation. We want to bring together vocational education schools with sectors, with employers, so they operate common governing boards, which employ also employers, organizations, and capacity in adult education. So it includes methodological supports and access and learning for all adults at whatever age and stage of the life they are. As I said, it's very important to speak about infrastructure, and these are a few pictures which I brought from my country. This is how a normal vocational education training school looked like more than 10 years ago, 2009. All buildings, all technology, people were preparing to be mechanics. This was not attractive. This is for boys who will not afford well marks in upper secondary education mostly, with many problems, social problems, etc. After these 10 years, our competence centers, as we call them, look like now. We invested more than 200 million euros in these 10 years of EU structural funds to build up technical schools or competence centers, as we call them now, to be bright, shiny, technologically advanced institutions which are very attractive to the people. So think about environment in which you want the young people to learn. It is very important, because by learning we acquire not only social networks and skills and the behavior, but we also acquire idea how the working place should look like. And that will be pressure from those people. Either they will be employees or they will become entrepreneurs themselves, to think about environment which makes learning attractive and efficient. Basically, this slide explains a little bit what I said already. This is about a change of VET curriculum development from situation before the reforms, which should be recognizable probably in many countries, also in India. There was little impact of industry skills needs. Vocational schools were educational establishments, first of all. So people working here were thinking about what they think is important for those people to have. Very often that was not connected to industry needs, especially during the last 10 years of big changes. It was partially outdated with strongly regulated programs, no national qualification structure. So in other words, education system was living its own life, and economy was living its own life. And these life ways went very, very different one from each other. And the whole idea of education reform is to bring them back together. So we have to see that education corresponds to the life, not only economic course needs, but all changes in society. And that was the changes what we did, and introduction of flexible modular curriculum, which I talked about, based on learning outcomes and sectoral approach probably is a core feature in these reforms. If I can say a few words about higher education changes and reforms. So we definitely see higher education specifically and particularly as a knowledge hubs in a digital age. So we want all four aspects to be present in each higher education institution, which first of all creates a knowledge base. Second, innovation is a major purpose of higher education, to increase innovation capacity of enterprises, again seeing university in close connection with the labor market and economy. It's creation of human capital to create human resources, and collaboration to merge resources. Because also in Latvian situation we have many higher education institutions, too many for a small country like Latvia. We have 47 higher education institutions, and each one is competing in some ways to the other, and we see a collaboration, joint study programs as a solution and the way forward. What are the mechanisms in higher education, which of course is autonomous, and there is academic freedom, and government in no ways can dictate what and how higher education should teach to their students, but there are financial instruments, and we changed the financing model from the past, which was based on student enrollment numbers and government-funded study places in certain areas, to a three-pillar model, where a first pillar still remains based on student numbers, but the second and the third pillars are different. The second pillar is stimulating research as a basis for international projects and other sources. That means as more research university or higher education school produces, as government funding increases with it. And the third pillar is innovation-oriented funding, which promotes development of specialization and collaboration with entrepreneurs. So as more joint programs with entrepreneurs and economy, university and institution is doing, as it's followed and supported by a government funding. So the motivation is clearly here for higher education institutions to look towards innovation and economy. Another specific aspect, which I'm not sure is that relevant to India as it is relevant to Latvia, is so-called work with NEET, or NEET, not in employment and education or training. The people who, for different reasons, are falling out of education. And that is a demographic challenge for us. As I said, we have 2 million people, 200,000 students in total. For us, when you speak about millions, we count hundreds. In Latvian case, we don't have any other resources as humans. So we do our best and we try to care for everyone, each person. That is our main treasure what we have. So we cannot afford simply that any percentage, 1, 2 or 3 or 5% of people, of young people, after finishing some stage of education would simply fall out of it, either not being educated further or not finding employment or jobs. And that's why a big part of our reforms are devoted to NEET, getting them back into education or training. The numbers, as you see here, as I said, 850 persons completed the project successfully, what we did, and we are very proud of it. It's a small number, maybe by your accounts, but for us it is very important. And there are some figures illustrating how we see the situation and how we want to change it. And there are some ways how we work with NEET persons. Indirect ways, it's a face-to-face meetings, finding them in schools and somewhere else outside on the street, probably. It's a social work, it's done by social workers. Calling, writing personal letters, Facebook or other profile accounts, so trying to reach them directly and personally, trying to convince that this is not a good way of ending your education. Or indirect way, through intermediate bodies, NGOs, young persons' parents, authority, information in social media, generally snowball methods, creation of the support locations, points of access or information points. general education, support for children and youth at social risk before they become needs. Another very important aspect of reforms what we are doing. So again, you see numbers which may not seem very, very great, but that is mostly work with municipalities and schools directly and methodological guidelines with parents, creating strategic partnerships in order to convince that and change also pedagogy and the ways of method of work, trying to make education as attractive and interesting to young people at the early age, so before they become bored or decide that they don't want this education anymore. That is very important of our work aspects. If I speak about challenges, of course it's not all that shiny and bright as I explained in my vision. There are challenges and problems, and of course the main challenge is the work with entrepreneurs. In order to make this model work with the work-based learning and apprenticeships, we have to work with entrepreneurs, and obviously the thing is that being a small and medium enterprise country, the interest for work-based learning is not universal and not general. For many entrepreneurs, it's still not very clear that they, in short term, make benefit from having internships and the students at their workplace. But we are trying to work through different formats. Lifelong learning for employed adults. Another, as I mentioned, a huge area of work.
Mr. Kunde?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
I have to. Sure, I will cut it short. I will not speak much about lifelong learning, obviously, of adults. I mentioned the main idea, but it involves a number of municipalities. At the end, when I have to make a conclusion or to make it very short, I would say that lifelong learning is a key competence for the future. I said that at the beginning, but I would emphasize that ending my presentation. It is a main target and the main goal that people would understand that they will have to learn the whole life. We cannot anymore prepare people during the general or vocational or even higher education for the rest of your lives. You will have to continue learning whenever that will be needed and necessary, because life and work will change. And the general education role mostly is to give transversal skills. VET role, in our view, to keep doors open for continuous requalification, and higher education ensure ongoing research and innovation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunter, and sorry to interrupt. If I knew that was your last slide, then I would have bothered you. I think you gave an excellent overview of the Latvian higher education, education system, both at school and higher education. And I think for all of us, it's a great learning, because we always keep thinking that, these kind of things should happen in our education system as well. But you very rightly said that you're dealing with 200,000 people and we are talking about billions. We have about 600,000 students in the city of Pune alone. So you can imagine, and with about 15 universities. But nevertheless, I think it is not about the numbers, but about the will to actually do these reforms. And we hope that our government also has the will to carry out these reforms. I think personally what I felt was the best was NEET. I mean, to cater to people who are not in employment, education or training is something really going beyond your, beyond something that any government would think of doing. And I'm so glad that your government could even think of, people who are not in employment or not in education and trying to do something for them. At the school level, you all are carrying out a lot of reforms, but at the higher education level, I think giving autonomy to universities, though you all are funding them through the government, is again something that our government needs to learn. There's so much of regulation that even to universities like ours and many private universities where not a penny of funding comes from the government, but even then, we don't enjoy that kind of autonomy. And I think it's all about giving the academic freedom to institutions and academicians. That's when really good reforms can happen. So we will talk about this a little later. May I request Winnie, you to take the podium and address the gathering. I think the first speaker enjoys the liberty of time, but I hope you can stick to 15 minutes.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks for being invited here and be able to share my thoughts. it's actually a great privilege to be able to share my thoughts with all of you today. So I'm going to share some perspectives on how to build employability for skills and readiness for the future. In doing so, I will share some thoughts from the actual work that we have done at Microsoft in working with schools and communities and higher education institutions. I'm not able to move the slide. Okay, yeah, that's right. We are in the midst of a digital transformation. And in saying so, there are a lot of disruptive technologies today, such as Internet of Things, mobile technologies, cloud computing, machine learning, that are disrupting the business models. A few years back, less than a decade back, we were seeing brick and mortar companies. But over the last 10 years, we have seen ideas that have taken shape by investments of few $100s and are now today global organizations, but leveraging the power of entrepreneurship, innovation, and digital assets. And we see plenty of examples, whether it's Uber, whether it's Flipkart, you look at e-commerce companies, you look at manufacturing and production, you're seeing intelligent cars, there are pilots being done on driverless cars as well. So no matter which area we look at, we see there is a profound change. And another aspect which has been talked about earlier as well is the nature of the jobs that will unfold. So artificial intelligence today is becoming a reality. Making machines enable and understanding human emotion, looking at competence, information, and be able to take decisions. And there are numerous examples of that. So a few years back, we weren't thinking about, for example, solution specialists on cloud technologies. We weren't looking at energy auditors, fuel cell engineers, sustainability managers. But in the times to come, when resources are less and we are competing for alternate energy resources, sustainability, leveraging bigger cloud technology so that we do not invest in redundant and legacy systems, newer jobs will get created. So there's one thing that whenever a technology disrupts a change, there is fear that there'll be loss of jobs. I think we need to overcome that fear of loss of jobs, but look at the brighter side on how the new opportunities will get created. And here I'll share a perspective that Microsoft is absolutely passionate about education, and the core vision which is shared and articulated by the leadership in over 100 countries is to empower every student, educator, and institution to do more and achieve more. And where my previous distinguished speaker closed his conversation saying that one should be a lifelong learner, this is where we start, that in today's time and age where things are changing so fast, there is no choice but to be a lifelong learner. So in order to achieve that, we need to fundamentally rethink about how we get educated, how do we create collaborations, how do we move forward in our lives. So our core mission is to empower every single child on 21st century skills. Skills of critical thinking, collaboration, problem solving, and attention to detail. So we have to have thinkers, and education is not just about graduating with a piece of degree, but be prepared for a life to encompass change and to move forward and learn and evolve. So blending formal and informal. So we learn more through collaboration. Digital content revolution, so there's information explosion. Today content is not a challenge, it's abundantly available. What is required is what do you do with content and how do you convert it into a skill that will make you valuable as a person to be recruited or starting an entrepreneurship unit. Employability and readiness, so there was conversation about knowledge, skills, and attitude and values. So I think these are fundamental aspects that have to be thought through, and personalized learning experiences. Everybody has different ways of learning. So someone learns through activities, someone learns through hearing, writing, reading. So we need to look at individual differences, and our education system should be able to encompass all of that. So in our work with educators, we work with educators, students, and institutions, leaderships as well, and I will just come to that in a while. Microsoft Subscribes has developed this core framework called Education Transformation Framework. It's a fundamental. So if we were to talk about digital transformation in education, it's not just about a hardware and a software conversation. It's not just about making those choices, but it is all about the pillars around teaching, learning, and research. How do we relook at curriculum? And we saw perspectives from Latvia that how they have changed the curriculum, how they have changed the approach towards learning and teaching. So it's not just about teaching, let's say 40 courses during a particular degree program, but even if you were to teach 8 courses, and if they have interdisciplinary approach and they have hands-on projects which are industry integrated, I can assure with the work that we have done on our courses on hospitality and management, we could generate global employability for our students. Second is, how do we create learning spaces and what kind of research infrastructure can be created? We have seen most of the funds go to, for research funds go to public institutions, and the private institutions struggle for funding, either it's through self-generated or through philanthropic efforts or through industry sponsorships. So here you could look at newer opportunities being thrown open by technology. You could have virtual labs, you could do big data experiments, you could leverage large research infrastructure opportunities thrown open by technology. Today there are wonderful solutions that are available where you could leapfrog and do big things in lesser amount of time by leveraging the opportunities that exist. And then is a connected campus. It's about how do we manage our facilities, create secure environments for learning and teaching, and also about the entire student life cycle management. At Microsoft, we believe that relationships are not just for a limited period. When we are working with students and partnering with educators and universities, these relationships are for a lifetime. And we believe in the power of setting up communities. When educators join Microsoft Educator community, they get connected to thousands and thousands of educators worldwide, sharing global practices and bringing the technology to the classroom. If I were to enumerate all the programs that we are doing in education domain, they could be classified under K-12, which is school domain, higher education, work that we do with students, and professional development opportunities for faculty. So in K-12, we have these wonderful schools, which we call as showcase schools. These act as lighthouse institutions for the neighborhood schools, and we have innovative educators who not only embrace pedagogical innovation in teaching for self, but reach out to communities. I mean, we have educators who have created communities, for example, on entrepreneurship, on sustainable development. They are powering global projects across 100 countries, sharing and comparing and contrasting the experiences that they have learned on their projects. We have a wonderful educator in Gujarat. Just one of the many examples. In a year, we reach out to about 95,000 educators. In her approach to teaching entrepreneurship, normally one would do lectures, theory, and some bit of practical as well. This teacher, she created an online bazaar for her students, and the students would recycle materials, create products, and then help them to market them over either website or face-to-face interventions as well. Such is the power of an ordinary teacher with extraordinary passion and with students ready to give their energies. She raised $100,000 through the student-led intervention and funded for 1,000 underprivileged girls' education. So in teaching normal courses, you can be extraordinary in your outlook and leverage technology to create these experiences. So I just want to point out, these are not like conventional programs. This is real. You can see innovation and entrepreneurship in action and skilling in action as well. So over the 12 years, we have trained about 8.5 lakh teachers across 12 states in higher education as well. Our focus is on pedagogical innovation. It is not about XYZ tool, but it's about in a classroom, how can my students collaborate not only within the university premises, but outside as well. How can I have multiple universities worldwide participating and doing collaborative projects at the same time? I will also share some perspectives here. We have certification for teachers on teaching with technology. So these are globally and universally accredited by United Nations and UNESCO, and this is recognized worldwide. In university and STEM, we do special sessions on pedagogical innovation on teaching with technology. Have you heard about a tool called Minecraft? Yes? So just like you have Lego toys in which you experiment with wooden blocks, Minecraft are digital assets which enable creating great learning experiences for students. So you could design, let's say, a smart city. You could tinker with colors and materials. It enables design thinking, defining problems of a boundary, and then solving it. You want to drive value-based learning. You could drive, for example, universal cases or storytelling can be done through Minecraft. You could create bridges, buildings, mechanical engines. You could create multiple scenarios of learning through Minecraft. So it's also another tool of pedagogical innovation that we use. Artificial intelligence. Today, artificial intelligence is being used across multiple sectors. For example, in healthcare, you could do prescriptive medication, or you could do surgeries which could be much more reliable and effective. For example, if you're doing a LASIK surgery, depending upon the patient's condition and his condition and multiple other factors, today you have machine learning models that can, before you undergo a surgery, it could predict with 95% accuracy whether your surgery will be successful or not. Imagine that power of how AI is being used. Or for example, if there are complicated tests that have to be done, today there are machine learning models that can reduce, that are much more accurate and can reduce the inaccuracies of judgment on the part of doctors. In agriculture, with climate change, you can predict what should be the sowing seasons, sowing time, so that the yield of your input could be maximized. And this is all for real, and this has all happened in India. It's not that I'm drawing these examples from the West, but these are cases, for example, real-time experiments that have been done in partnership with government of Andhra Pradesh, and the scientists have been able to drive implications for that. And in education as well, you can, based on the machine learning models, you can predict whether a student will drop out from the school. So AI School has numerous resources for students where you could predict, where you could do multiple courses available through a MOOC platform. We also have Microsoft Professional Program for higher education, where there are tracks which are linked with employability. For example, there are job roles in computer science, productivity, data sciences, and linked to these job roles, we have courses that will enable certification and an output so that you are viewed as a valuable resource by the industry. So for example, big data or for artificial intelligence, there are courses, there are supervised projects that could be implemented as well. So right from ethics and values in artificial intelligence to legal aspects to deep learning models, all this content is available in public domain. But if there needs to be a deeper engagement through partnership and building capacity, all those opportunities are also available. Likewise, for cybersecurity as well, We also have Imagine Academy, where there are more than 400 courses that are available to all the faculty and students in multiple areas. I would just like to stop here, that the opportunities are endless, certification opportunities to capacity building, and Microsoft is all ready to partner with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinny. In a short span of 15 minutes, you really covered everything so well, and I'm sure there are students and some of us as teachers and academicians would really want to connect with you to understand more about how we could use your technologies in our education delivery. I think the next person present here is who's virtually present with us, and I would like to introduce him, is Professor Santosh Kumar Mehrotra, who's the Professor of Economics at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Dr. Santosh Kumarji, I hope you can see us and hear us, and we will be happy to, we would have been happy if you had come down to Symbiosis and we would have met you in person. However, now with technology supporting even such important conferences, we would request you to address the August gathering.
Thanks very much indeed. Can you hear me loud and clear? I've been hearing you very well. It's been very interesting. Can you hear me?
Yes, of course we can.
And have you got my PowerPoint up on the screen? Not yet.
Not yet.
I've shared my screen. So let me see if there's an issue here.
Yes, sir, we can see it now.
Oh, okay. So you can see the challenge of skill development in India on the screen. You can see. Okay, wonderful, super. Thanks very much indeed. Well, thanks very much indeed for inviting me. Let me start. Let me begin by saying that it's been really quite wonderful listening to Vinny and Guntas and Vidya, and particularly listening to Vidya and Guntas, because what I'm going to speak about is actually going to bring you back to earth, because I'm going to talk about the massive challenge of skill development in India. And let me just begin by saying that Gunta's impression that we don't have a needs problem is completely misplaced. You would be interested to know that I have done this estimate based on National Sample Survey data, that already in 2005, we had 85 million needs in our country. And in between 20, and that number was growing slowly, but in 2011-12, that number had increased somewhat. But in the most recent data that I've just analyzed for 2015-16, we've got 115 million needs. In other words, there's been a 33 million needs increase in our country in a matter of a decade. And if anyone is trying to tell you that we don't have an unemployment problem, well, listen to the following numbers. The total number of open unemployed till 2011-12, when non-agricultural jobs were really growing quite fast in our economy, was about 10 million. We now have the 17-18 National Sample Survey Organization data tells us that we now have 33 million people. So more than a tripling of the absolute number of who are just absolutely unemployed. Now, most of the discussion that so far has happened in this session on skills has tended to focus on what could be called the unorganized sector, could be called the organized sector, and skill development in the organized sector. But perhaps the Indians in the audience would know that about 78% of all jobs in our economy are in the unorganized sector, and we've got a real challenge for skilling those. So this is the structure of my presentation. Let me talk about the education levels and skill issues in the current labor force. Then I'll say a few words about the skill ecosystem in our country and speak about it in an international context. I'll go on to talk about the quality issues in our skills ecosystem. Fourthly, talk about industry involvement, the quality of that industry involvement, and finally close with one slide with policy implications. I can tell you I have a total of only 14 slides, and I'm already on the third one. The educational level of the Indian workforce, our workforce suffers from very, very serious problems, which I'll speak to in a minute. One result of that is a very significant share of even those who are getting education are simply unemployable, and one of the reasons why unemployment is high and unemployment is growing is because of the sheer quality of the education level. In fact, historically, the education level of women in our country has been poorer, and that is an important reason why the share of female labor force has been falling, but I'll come back to that in a minute. I'm just talking about the general academic education level of the workforce. When it comes to the skills, well, less than 5% of our workforce has formally acquired vocational skills. I think you contrast that to any of our competitors like Korea or China, you will find that the numbers are in the order of 85% to 90% of the workforce has got formally acquired vocational skills. Look at the status of our manufacturing and service sector. What is the nature of the workforce in this sector? We still have in the manufacturing sector in 2015-16, 38% of the manufacturing workforce had primary or less education, an additional 19% at 8 years or less than 8 years of education, and 32% only 32% at secondary or higher secondary. Under 10% of the manufacturing workforce in our country consists of graduates. And even in the manufacturing sector, only 10% had formal or informal vocational education or training. In the services sector, the situation is not very different. My last bullet compares this situation to East Asia. The countries of East Asia managed to sustain economic growth of 7 to 8% per annum for 15 years to 20 years on average, primarily because they industrialized. And how did they industrialize? They had an industrial policy. So each of the East Asian miracle economies, they had not only an industrial policy, they focused on export-oriented manufacturing, which absorbed workers from labor. But not only that, they also had a general academic education policy and a Tibet policy, which was aligned to industrial policy. So the way they managed to do it is they managed to ensure much higher levels of kids actually in entering vocational education, a subject which I will return to. And you just saw in the Latvian slides that 35% of all the kids are in vocational. And, we have less than 5% of all our kids in vocational. In China, the share of all kids who finish 9 years of general academic education enter vocational. So one of the problems that we have in our country is that we are allowing our young to move up into higher education and acquire very poor skills, and that's why they become unemployable, a subject which I will return to. What we need to do is to very early on divert them towards vocational skills, and then perhaps the kind of programs that Vinny was talking about might become relevant for our teachers. The good news is that in the last 10 years, we've managed to ensure pretty much universal secondary education. Our secondary enrollment rate has now reached about 85 to 90%. And on account of that, there's been upward pressure in our higher education system. with higher education actually enrollment going from 11% in 2006 to 26% in 2017. The trouble with such a rapid increase in numbers, this massification of higher education or tertiary education that has happened, is a dramatic decline in quality. This massification has not meant learning levels are high, and there are serious shortages of STEM teachers at secondary and higher secondary level. And this is partly because the majority of our tertiary education students studying in private colleges which have mushroomed across the country are in the arts and the social sciences. Almost none are in agriculture, despite the fact that 47% of our workforce is still in agriculture. In fact, 53% of our enrollment in tertiary education is social sciences and humanities, while engineering, manufacturing, science is 39%, of which science is only 5%, which is a very serious problem. Which is the reason why I would argue that if we really want to create the human capital base to become an industrializing country, and we have no choice but to do that if we are to create jobs outside of services and outside of agriculture, then it's very, very urgent that investment as a proportion of GDP, which is only 4% as of now, less than 4%, rises. This is public investment. And in addition, there is a need for a structural shift to create an industrial policy and to ensure our education skills policy is aligned to science, technology, and innovation. And this requires an early diversion of kids into TVET and a focus on STEM in higher education. You know, if you look at the global skill scenario, there are essentially two models of skill development that are in place. There is the Anglo-Saxon one, which is in the red on the left-hand side, and on the right is the Germanic one. I want to just sort of focus on the very last bar in the very last panel at the bottom of this slide. You see, in the Anglo-Saxon model, which is the model which unfortunately we have adopted, there is a very narrow interpretation of skills. In the Germanic model, which is a far more successful, far more effective model, there is a focus on skills being part of a broader occupation, meaning there is a notion that there should be a systematic relation between theoretical knowledge and practical skills and the social identity of the person. It focuses, the dual education system of the Germans actually focuses its skill development on not just theory, but also ensuring that industry is directly involved and practical knowledge is being imparted. But it's not just practical knowledge. There is also actual work experience as part of the apprenticeship system. You don't get certified in the dual system without that on-the-job training. That is not the way the system works in the Anglo-Saxon one, which is unfortunately the model that we have adopted. Let me turn very quickly to the 5 pillars of the ecosystem that we have. The first is vocational education in secondary and higher secondary schools. Unfortunately, the way this system is designed, it does not offer vertical mobility to tertiary education, to BVOC. If you were to focus your attention to vocational education in higher secondary, you cannot, move up you can't move up into a university. That means vocational becomes a dead end. Therefore, vocational cannot become aspirational. Secondly, we have the vocational training providers that have mushroomed under the financing of the government support, which is essentially NSTC, the National Skill Development Corporation. And unfortunately, most of these vocational training providers funded by the NSTC are all providing 3-month training, all short-term training, and there is no possibility of upward mobility, and which is one very important reason that with just 3 months training on a very poor quality general academic education, these kids have very poor placement rates. The placement rate of NSDC-funded training is merely 12%. Then we have in our ecosystem the ITIs, the Industrial Training Institutes, the public and the private ones. What has happened in the ITI ecosystem is quite tragic in the following sense, that in the last 10 years we've gone from about the public ones, which are reasonably good quality, from about 1900 to about 2500 in the last 10 years. But the private ones, which were under 2000 10 years ago, private ITIs, they are now 11,000. Obviously, again, if you see such dramatic increase in numbers, then you will see a very sharp decline in quality. And unfortunately, of course, the ITIs also tend to offer very little upward mobility unless the trainee has also done, the National Institute of Open Schooling academic program as well. And then fourthly, we have the 16 ministries of the Government of India, other ministries other than the MHRD and the Ministry of Skill Development, which I spoke about in the first two bullets. You have all these 16 ministries, again offering, like the NSDC funded ones, mostly short-term with no upward mobility. Finally, we have, in a sense, what Infosys and Wipro and Microsoft might be doing, which is enterprise-based training by employers. Well, the trouble is that if you look at the World Bank survey in 2009 of what proportion of registered enterprises, the unregistered enterprises don't even do any vocational training in-house. They only do this informal apprenticeship. The formal organized enterprises, only 16% of them were offering any enterprise-based in-house training. In the year 2009, that share had increased to 36% in 2014, but most of those are large firms. They are precisely the firms which are the Wipros and the Tatas and the Birlas, and they are not the small ones. They are not the medium ones at all. So clearly, even the enterprises, the employers themselves are not doing very much training. Meanwhile, of course, the government has convinced itself that we need to train 400 million people. But the ecosystem that I've just described is incapable of meeting this quantitative challenge because it is too narrowly.
Dr. Mehrotra, I will, have to
I'm going to finish.
request you to.
Going to finish. There are very serious problems in the quality because it's a supply-driven system, it's government-driven, and it's not it's not an industry-driven system. It is not employer-driven, which makes it very ineffective. And the result is that the system, in any case, draws upon a very foundationally weak model, the Anglo-Saxon model. We have very few instructors. We have, majority of our workers have informally acquired training. They need to be, they need to go through recognition of prior learning. And by the way, Mr. Guntaz, you may be interested to know that we do also have a vocational qualification framework, a document which I wrote for the government. But unfortunately, it has been implemented in such a shoddy manner that there is no notion, there is no acceptance of those qualification frameworks and competency-based curricula by industry. Unfortunately, the sector skill councils that have been funded by the NSDC have created about 10,000 national occupation standards, which have been bundled into about 2,000 qualification packs, which have all been written by international consultants. So this is a situation which cannot create an ecosystem or an environment where competency-based curriculums can be implemented. And let me close by just saying that this is a situation which needs very urgent attention. And I will just summarize, this is my last slide. The foundational skills of our workforce are very weak. The skills ecosystem, the 5 pillars that I just spoke about are government-driven, government-financed, and they are not demand-driven. The quality of our training in the 5 pillars remains extremely weak. And a very important reason why this is the case, because industry engagement through the sector skill councils is extremely weak. And as far as Industry 4.0, which we were talking about, I'm afraid in the government there is almost no recognition of the requirements of skilling. as increasingly the big corporates turn robotics and automation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mehrotra. I mean, you were really very passionate about enumerating all the challenges, and I fully agree with you. I've worked on that side. I work closely with the Ministry of HRD and the Ministry of Skill Development. And the irony is that whereas there was a national policy on skill development which was formulated in 2009, this government thought of putting up a skill development ministry, which ideally, this is my personal opinion, we shouldn't have done a separate ministry. It should have been integrated with the Ministry of Human Resource Development. Be as it may, we all know what the challenges are. And there's a lot to learn from the Latvian system, but again, we're talking about billions of youngsters that we need to skill, and so very rightly put forth by you. But let us now talk to someone who is working at the ground level, Mr. Clement, who's the Chief Skills and Business Development officer of UNDP. And he's been working in India, and I think whatever challenges that you quoted, Dr. Mehrotra, let us understand from him at the ground level what he's doing and whether these challenges persist, or you find a rosy picture and you try to implement certain good things.
Thanks a lot, Vidya. As Dr. Vidya was saying, my name is Clement. I work for UNDP, the United Nations Development Programme. I've been living in India for the last 10 years, so even though I'm not Indian, I have a bit of understanding about what's happening. So the good thing when you go at the end of a panel session is that there is a lot of things that have already been said. And there is a lot of things that I completely agree with. The presentation that Mr. Gunta did is actually quite impressive about the kind of a reform that the Latvian government is getting through. I do believe this is everything that actually India needs. But then again, India putting things into their context, doing that in India might not be that easy because of the scale of the problem. And what the Professor Malhotra just presented, it's definitely something that we've been struggling with, and with UNDP we've been, actually this is the kind of a difficulty that exists. Right now I would like to take that idea, and because all of us, we discuss broadly about this idea of education to work transition. How do you make sure that through the education system you can actually build the competence and the capacity of young people so they can find an opportunity for themselves. But in the next 5 minutes, and I don't want to take too long because we're a bit late already, but just to turn it around a bit. Instead of taking it from the policy part of it, or from the competence of the engagement, what the private sector can do, or from the kind of the ecosystem, as Professor Malhotra explained, I'd like to take it from a user perspective component and much more from the student. At the end of it, what we all strive for is to make sure that the student should be at the core of what we are doing. And this is also, as part of the UN, what we believe quite a lot, no? This idea of no one should be left behind as part of the SDG. So if we take it from that perspective, there is a thing in India, first, that most of, and I would just ask the question about the students that are here at the back of the room. How many of you actually know exactly what you want to do in life? What's your career? Can you raise your hand, the one that actually know about what will be your career in the next few years? A few, not that much. So tell me right now, is there any kind, does the school, the university, actually provide you with any kind of a support so you can identify what will be that career? Neither. So, as far as I'm concerned, and the more you come, and the more you come to the more underprivileged kind of a background, to the underprivileged school, the government school and other, this is one of the main problems. There is, in India, it actually doesn't exist. There is no support system in India that makes sure that young people can discover who they are, what are their aptitudes, what are their preferences, and actually put that into perspective about what actually the environment which is for them, and so understanding what should be their career path. This idea of career guidance and counseling in India is completely inexistent, and especially when you go to government school. So what does that mean? Is that you actually learn something in school, but you actually have no clue how you're going to actually apply that knowledge later on when you for any opportunity in the workplace. And that's already a big kind of discrepancy between the two. So how do you want to make sure that you facilitate that idea of education to a transition if you actually don't know what that transition is going to be? And this is one of the first things that we've been working on quite a lot. As part of one of the projects called DISHA that we have with UNDP, supported by IKEA Foundation, this is the idea of helping young people, and especially young girls, to discover who they are, what they want, what are their aspirations, and through this idea of counseling, so they can understand better exactly and define for themselves their career path. The idea is not so much of imposing them any kind of career path, and especially understanding what are the social norms in India. Most of the young girls, for their parents, are kind of limited to get married and then stay in the kitchen, kind of. What we want is to open a world of opportunity for them, so they will have much more opportunity, actually, to be able to strive and to do a lot of different jobs, everything that actually a boy can do. So that's the first step for us, that this idea of counseling. How do we bring counseling within education institution so we make sure that young people can define their career paths by themselves? But then when we do that, and to go back to what Mr. Gunther was saying, then also what Vinny was saying, this idea of 21st century skill. The education system in India might not be fit for what's going to come up. As we know, changes are coming, and changes, it's not that they are coming, they have already come, and it's very fast. While the first few, before the Industrial Revolution, were taking 100 years mostly, the last one, it's less than 50 years from the previous one, and it's going to go faster and faster. And as Gunther was saying, 65% of the kids entering into the education system today, they're going to be into a job that don't exist. So building the technical skills for jobs that will disappear, it's actually not that relevant. Well, there is another set of skills, as again Vinny was discussing as well, which we call ourselves much more, not only 21st century skills, but actually transferable skills. These are skills that can apply to any kind of job. It goes to this idea of digital skills for sure, which are a critical component in the world today. Communication skill, definitely. And especially in India, English skill. If you don't speak English, you're going to have a lot of problems. But also the cognitive and the non-cognitive skill, which are actually critically important. The cognitive are more about critical thinking, etc. While the non-cognitive, it's more about creativity, empathy, teamwork, leadership, and others. One of the things that we believe that they are the critical one, while the cognitive skills, and they need to be taught at the earliest possible. Especially the non-cognitive one. Everybody know the cognitive and the technical skill, most of it will be replaced by machines soon. And even the basic cognitive skills. While the non-cognitive skills, everything that deals with interpersonal relationship, empathy, leadership, teamwork, that it will take some time before a machine can actually do so. And we believe that by developing those set of skills, we can actually offer more opportunity to young people. But it's not only, and I like your chart, Gunther, that you had on this idea of competence, because it's not only the skill, it's actually the skill, the knowledge, and the attitude that goes with it. And that creates a competence. And what the private sector employer are looking for, it's not so much a skill, but actually a competence, because a competence becomes an applied skills, because something that you can actually use. One of the things that we've been doing actually, for example, in India, because it does happen for some part, it's to work as well with a program called NSS. I believe you might know NSS, the National Social Service. What we find out, UNDP did some research at regional level, finding out that volunteer work, any kind of volunteer work, it's beneficial for the beneficiary that you work with for sure, but at the end of the day, it's much more beneficial for yourself. And it's actually because you develop by volunteering, you actually develop skills and a set of skills, and especially the skills that you develop are actually the cognitive and the non-cognitive skills. Because any kind of volunteer work, you will need to have empathy towards the beneficiary that you work with. You will need to have planning, creativity, teamwork, all those set of skills. So one of the things we're doing right now with the ministry is to do a research and to see that if students that are passing through the NSS program actually become more employable. And at the end, what we will try to do with them, it's at the end of the 3 years of NSS, through a kind of a workshop to help them translate how an experience through the NSS can become a competence. Because they have the skills, the knowledge, and the attitude, and as Gunther was explaining, these become a competence that could actually be sellable to potential employers. So that's for the third part. And then the last one, which has been touched upon a bit, which is not happening that much in India neither, should happen much more through different process. But this is the linkages with the private sector and the employers. Industry should be more involved. And industry can be involved within the education system. There are a lot of linkages that needs to be created from this idea of bringing industry so they can actually speak directly with the students through guest lecture, creating a mentoring network, but especially the idea of internship or apprenticeship, the idea of experience. How do we create that kind of experience for students while they are still within the education institution, being vocational or general education? We truly believe that by promoting this idea of experience, then it increases de facto the employability of young people. First, because they gain work experience by working, even through an internship. But also because looking for an internship, at the end of the day, it's the same than looking for a job. You need to make your CV, your resume, motivation letter, you go for an interview. If you do that while you are still in the education system, then you're actually much better prepared to do so when you're actually out and you're looking for a job. Creating that linkages with the industry is actually critical to make sure that we facilitate that idea of education to work transition. Apprenticeship could be a critical element for that because it's industry-based, it's industry-led, and for sure it ensures that what you're going to learn as a skill, it's the one that actually will be relevant for any kind of potential employment. So based on that, do understand all the difficulty that exists in India. I might be a little less kind of dark than what Professor Malhotra is saying. I do see that there are a lot of initiatives that works. There are a lot of education institutions that are actually changing the way they work, which they work much more project-based, not so much dogmatic kind of a learning. There is something that's happening even with the skilling ecosystem, even so it takes a lot of time. But I might be a bit more optimistic about what could happen, and especially because I truly believe in the energy and the capacity of young people. At the end of the day, they should be the one driving that agenda. And it's not so much of the policy framework, it's not so much of economists or development experts or even the private sector at the end, but what we need to make sure is actually we can empower young people enough so they can raise their voice, demand what they need, and make sure that that happens. So the ball is more in your court. Make sure that you actually, what you need, make sure that you make it known. Make sure that you actually work with your professor, with the academia, with the faculty, to ensure that it becomes a kind of a collaborative process. And you're not only at the receiving hand. The world today has changed. The teacher is actually the only one having the knowledge. The knowledge is at your fingerprint. Everybody has a phone, everybody can get to the knowledge. So the teacher is not so much here to actually dispense knowledge, but much more to actually accompany you in your career, accompany you in the path, in your empowerment path. So if you take it that way, that means that it's much more of a collaboration. But if it's a collaboration, that means that you have as much responsibility than actually the faculty and actually the university. So it also depends on you to actually create the future that you want. And I truly believe that young people, especially in India, have huge energy and they have huge motivation, and the change will come from them. It won't come from the top and all the politician or the policymaker or whomsoever. It will actually come from the bottom and from the young people. They will be the one changing that whole ecosystem and changing what we see. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clement. It was a wonderful discourse. I liked what you spoke about transferable skills, and when you talk about transferable skills, whether they're communication skills, especially communication in English, digital skills and non-cognitive skills. And I think for all of us, even here in Symbiosis, we've been thinking about this, that how do you, one is of course imparting skills for employment, but how do you impart skills with, the right attitude? Because I think employers are now looking at, the EQ part of it more than the IQ. And we've just set up the Symbiosis Center for Emotional Wellbeing, and we're looking at how, the attitude of students towards anything, is, judged, and how they will fare. The other thing I would like to also talk about is the NSS scheme that you mentioned, and in most private universities, of course, the terminology NSS is not used anymore, but we do ensure that students do take part in community outreach activities. And we formed a department called as the Symbiosis Community Outreach Program and Extension. And this is for the very reason that we want our students to be sensitive towards the community, because majority of them come from affluent families, and they won't even know what it is to what kind of aspirations even the underprivileged young have. And therefore we have earmarked about 4 credits towards community service. And what we realized is that many of our past students who are now our alumni have either set up their own NGOs or are doing a lot of CSR activities in their corporate lives. And they trace it back to the community service activities back in school when they were studying with us. So I think the right attitude towards society and community is what we also want to build amongst students. So I think we've had a great session on skill development, on a wonderful education model of Latavia, which I just spoke to Gunter that I would really like to talk with you about this. And of course, Microsoft Corporation helping academic institutions, teachers and students to transform the education and reform the education. And here we have Clement, who's actually worked at the ground level and looked at how attitudes of students can be changed. So we threw the floor open for any question and answers. We'll be happy to answer your questions. So someone can circulate the mic in the audience. Professor Mehrudra, there could be some questions to you as well, so I hope you're there.
I'm there.
Yeah, great.
I'm listening very carefully.
Thank you.
Hello. My name is Vishnu Prabhu, second year MSc Economics student. My question is to Mr. Clement. Sir, you started your talk by asking a couple of questions that how many people know what they want to do in their career, and then you asked that how many people are agreed to the fact that the university is assisting you in that. So I raised my hand for that question, and sir, as you agreed, the university's job is to provide a particular set of skill set, and then through the curriculum give a blend of theory and practice in whatever area of interest yours is. Based on that, it is upon to the student to take the initiative to talk to particular set of particular teachers or people who have expertise in the field of your interest. So my question to you is that to what extent do you think that when it comes to deciding on your career, to what extent is it a personal choice, a personal initiative, and to what extent do you think the university can help you? Because if you ask me, I think it's more upon to the personal level that a student can come up with what they want to do rather than the university giving more of the assistance. Thank you.
Again, I do believe that, understand what I'm saying, that independently of what you want to do and the energy that you want to put in that, I do believe that still, yes, you might be able to receive advice from other people and other people that might have already done that or might have some experience and can link you with people which have that kind of experience. I do believe that there is a lot of value in discussing things, not trying to do it on your own, but trying to get advice from others, and especially from teachers in your own field. And I'm not saying that there should be a counselor. I believe that every teacher will be able to provide you with advice, because they will know about the industry, they might know about that kind of job, that kind of field. So the decision is yours, and I'm all for that. The decision should remain yours, and it's a personal decision. But it's not because it's yours that you have to do it alone. And that's the main difference. And that you can be guided by others to do so. And you should actually listen to others to make sure that you make the right decision. But your decision remains yours. It's a personal one for sure. I hope that answers your question.
Any other question?
Hello everyone, my name is Alexei Vishesh. I'm from second year MSc Economics from SSC. And first of all, I would really like to appreciate Dr. Clement for, I really appreciate what you said. It feels like you heard our voices. And my question is basically to Dr. Johari, but I don't mind if anybody answers the question. So I'm a student of urban development, and I have 2 questions. So the first one, you said that an AI in universities and schools, they can predict whether a student is going to perform or not and whether a student is going to drop out. So I would say my criticism is having AI inbuilt in schools, it takes out the human, the human out of the education system. And if a student is going to drop out of school and you're going to check it even before it gets admitted to school, he or she gets admitted to school, then I think you are blocking a chance for the growth of the person. But we can also say that can the AI be also used to actually, find out what are the true strengths of that person and, in which field that person can select. Do you see the scope for that? And one more question, ma'am, before you start speaking. The second question is that we already see a huge inequality in our society, and education is one big one. We are very privileged to be studying in this institution, but there are many who actually cannot afford it. And so instilling AI in institutions, it will come at a cost. And then the people who are at the bottom of the pyramid, in the income pyramid and also the social pyramid, they'll get left out. So do you think that bringing AI will, increase the inequality? And also, do you think can there be any programs where AI can be used to educate the people who actually cannot access the mainstream education field? Thank you.
So I would like to dispel some myths about what you said about artificial intelligence. It is a tool that augments anybody's capability. It's not substituting a teacher in the classroom or substituting doctors in healthcare or farmers in agriculture. But if you can empower somebody, there's a lot of data that rests. But if you can make sense out of that data, and a machine model can do that more effectively. For example, if there are tumors in the body and scans, take multiple scans over weeks have to be done to put in the exact location, for example, in the brain. But if you can do it in matter of hours and can make a doctor do more effective surgery, what is the harm in leveraging that technology? And talking about AI in education, I think I need to give the context. It's not about just using it in a university or a school. In a university system, you may have smaller number of teachers, a smaller number of students, and a teacher, when he or she interacts with the students, gets a fairly good idea about the progress because there are group projects, there are interactions. But when I talked about AI for predicting or reducing the dropout ratios, I talk about in a government scenario in a state where there may be 40,000 or 50,000 schools, and the government subsidizes or pays for the education of those children. And then there needs to be proper governance so that these children who are getting free education can move forward in the classroom. When we piloted with thousands and thousands of schools in the state of Andhra Pradesh, we got data that in which students, in which school in those remote villages will drop out. As a result, in those schools, the teachers could handhold the children or provide support in those areas so that the students could continue the education. So it's not a deterrent, but it's a tool that will help. People who would otherwise not get help will get help because of this. And AI, I think one needs to understand in entirety. I think there's so much application like speech recognition, people who are disabled, who have different kind of disabilities today on browsers that you search. You can have, for example, text that you can't read. Automatically the text can get converted into speech. For example, you're doing search and you're, let's say, looking paper on environmental consciousness, or you're looking at a particular theme, then if you have intelligent AI built into your search engines, then rather than give you 40,000 outcomes that are not relevant, it'll give me 10 focused academic papers that I am looking at. It will save me a lot of time. It will give me references that are comparable or contrasting to that. I'm designing a presentation, it will give me formats that could express my ideas more effectively. If I'm doing Excel sheets and doing data, it will give me clues on how reports can be generated. So it is a tool that can augment and not replace an expert.
Yes, thank you for the question. I mean, I didn't want to talk about technology, but I would like to step in very briefly. We have another problem in Latvia. We have very overcrowded classrooms. We may have students up to 15 or 18 in one class in upper secondary education. And teachers, 18, 15, yeah, that's overcrowded. Just talking about the scaling. You know, and the teachers say that, you know, we understand all this competency thing and we want to work individually with everyone and the students are different and every has its own needs and pace of learning. And we can't do it, you know, with all this group. And then we're working, for example, with Microsoft Latvia and artificial intelligence is very simple. That means simply adaptive curriculum, and that is what machine can do. In comparison, it is absolutely the same what happened 500 years ago in Europe, when suddenly we realized that every person could have a book and can read it on its own, in its own pace, and browse and go back and forth. And that is exactly what artificial intelligence is now offering us with the use of technology, nothing else.
Dr. Vidya, may I come in?
Yeah, sure.
May I come in?
Yeah,
Briefly
sure.
on the second question that was asked?
Yes, yes, of course.
Thanks, Dr. Vidya. You know, I want to address the second question that the young gentleman very astutely asked about inequality and how the growing use of artificial intelligence might actually reinforce the already very severe inequalities in our education system. Yeah, you know, I think we need to appreciate that Industry 4.0, I mean, while I very much underline the uses that Vinny was talking about, and I would wish her very well, I mean, I hope she succeeds with the Maharashtra government in convincing the Maharashtra government in using the kind of tools that she's talking about. I'm not so sure how much success they've had so far, but never mind that. You know, going back to the larger point, that such a small proportion of the entire workforce would have anywhere close to the kind of access to artificial intelligence tools or industry which might be using AI, that, you know, there is no question. I think the premise of the question that the young gentleman was asking was foundationally correct. In other words, if we want an inclusive pattern of education to emerge, all the big policy issues that I was talking about are absolutely central to our country, our youth, because if we do not ensure inclusiveness in our growth process, unfortunately, jobs will not grow, and the number of NEETs, which I pointed out, has been growing, which only grow. And by the way, just in passing, I want to mention that girls have gotten educated at exactly the same rate as boys in our country, and girls do not want to get married. A recent survey of 13 to 19-year-old teenage girls across the whole country showed the following, that 75% of them don't want to marry until the ages of 20 to 25, while the legal marriage age in our country is only 18, which means that they are looking for non-agricultural jobs. The non-agri jobs have to grow, and I'm not so sure if the introduction of Industry 4.0 technologies across our organized sector is going to be creating those jobs. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have the last question, if there is one? Anyone, you can decide between the two of you. After the session offline, you can always speak to the speakers.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for that great session and that great conference for us. I'm Jamila Jamal, and actually I'm from Afghanistan, and it is a great opportunity for me in SSE faculty. And my question is about skills that you discussed about changing skills and about earning skills. I think that I myself, this question is a general question, and I myself face with that problem, that I have studied all my education and continued all my education in Afghanistan in a Persian language. And I know now how much this skill is important, because in here I know that I myself face with different kinds of problem in language, because most of the things I know, some things that it is because of these skills I faced a problem. So I want to ask this question, that where can be the start points of this change in a country? For example, in Afghanistan, if we want to change this, if we want to start this change, where would we have it, and how much takes time, and how we create this this idea that this change is the basic change for development skills, and as you told that skills create employment, create job opportunities. This is the great points. Yeah, this I myself agree with this. That is the question, that how we can create this change, and how you make this possible for India, these changes. Thank you.
Communication skills, English skills, and then when she's saying that, at what point you should bring in this change. In
Afghanistan, I have no idea. I'll be very frank, but I'm sure that you will find it out yourselves. I mean, talking about scale, I mean, I've been talking also in some municipalities in Latvia, in my own country, and I'm talking about this change and what they could do with needs, etc., and they say, oh no, but you imagine, we have so many people here living, and how can we do it? And that was community of, I don't know, maybe 4,000 people, and they were speaking about a few dozens of the young generation. It will not come from top down. I mean, that's the only thing I can say. The government can do as much as it can. It can be very wise and forward-looking. It may have lots of money, etc., but if it will not be owned by yourself, that change starts in every place, in every community, and it will simply come when people will decide together that yes, we want it and we will do it. No one can press you to do it what you don't want to. I mean, all the same, what I was talking about our reforms. Sure, there are problems. Not everyone employer is willing to take in work-based learning persons. Sure not. But we can start somewhere. We can show example. And then a good practice can be shared, and people can look if they see benefits of it, they will repeat it. But change always starts with each person itself. And then it goes up to community, and then further on. And you can only see examples, and you can get advice and evidence how that works, but it will need to be done by yourself.
Okay. Can I just add something? Perhaps a bit more specific on the English communication skill part of. And to make the link with the question just before, this is where technology actually can help quite a lot. Everybody that has, and there are a lot of development, there will be a lot of startup, especially lately in India, to actually be able to learn English. The latest one that I know was from ILFS, something like English Bolo or something. But through an app, you can easily, after that it requires some kind of a consistency and persistence from the perspective of the student. I don't know much about the situation in Afghanistan. I know that self-paced learning is not that easy, globally speaking. I know as well that, for example, in India, if it is only a self-paced learning through technology and through an app, I don't believe it's going to work. It requires what we call a blended mode of delivery. So you can have the technology, and because you can learn English through song, Bollywood films, every so and then, so it's very interactive, very nice to learn, etc., and it works very well in terms of outcome. But it still requires a human interface to make sure that actually students learn. So you can use technology, but you still have a classroom and you still have a facilitator, which again is not so much of a teacher, but something that facilitates the class, that makes sure, and it can be a student, doesn't have to be a teacher, but something that facilitates, so it can be an extracurriculum activity. Somebody that facilitates the class, make sure that everybody study, everybody go through all the different steps, etc., etc. But technology can be used and can be very useful for that.
I'll just give you an example from your own country. We have a lot of students from Afghanistan, and of course you are one of them. And as you very rightly said, who brings in this change, and it has to be you. So we have this student who did her, I think, bachelor's in computer applications at our Symbiosis Institute of Computer Studies and Research, and she had this desire to bring in this change of whatever she had learned back home in her hometown or home village, I can say. And she did, so she was so passionate about coding, in the computer skills, that she wanted to go back and do this in her school in Afghanistan. And when she came to us, we told her to pilot it in our schools, in the Symbiosis schools. So we run a school for police children, and imagine this girl, along with another Afghanistan girl, again who was studying technology, went and piloted this project in our Pune Police Public School, a school that we run for police children. And then we piloted in two of our other schools where, the students do come from affluent families. And she was so confident about now doing this back home that she wanted to go back home and do it in her school, and I'm sure she's done it there. So much so that now we've given her a scholarship to study her MBA in information technology. So it has to come from within. So whether it's English communication skills or digital skills, whichever skills that you learn, and you've got the privilege of coming here through a scholarship, I'm sure whatever you learned here, you should go back and implement. Because when you think of policy makers bringing in this change, it will be a long drawn process. But at least for yourself, for your family, for your society and community, I'm sure you can do it faster. So I think we end this session here. I don't think you need to move because you're going to chair the next session. But I must thank each and every speaker and Dr. Mehrotra. You too. It was a wonderful session, a very interactive session, and I'm very happy that students have raised some very good questions. So thank you very much to all the speakers, and I think we break for the next session. I request the competitive.
Thank you, dear panelists, for the thought-provoking and interesting insights into diverse aspects: curriculum, quality in education, employability skills, technology revolution, and career guidance, and the collective impact on employment. May I now request the track chair, Dr. Vidya Yelodekar ma'am, to kindly felicitate the speakers for the track. Mr. Guntar Skatlax, Dr. Vinny Jauhari, Mr. Clément Chauvet, I would also like to thank Mr. Santosh Kumar Mehrotra for being a part on this track and for his valuable insights, and we will be sending across a token of appreciation to him as well. May I now request Dr. Jyoti Chandiramani to kindly felicitate the chair track, Dr. Vidya Yelodekar ma'am. I would like to request the panelists, Dr. Jyoti ma'am and Dr. Devdalal sir, to gather for a group photograph.
Okay, can you allow me to take one more? Thank you very much, everybody.